All right, welcome to this week's live office hours. I'm flying solo today. Casey was called for jury duty, so so we're gonna mix it up a little bit here. Um, so as we're waiting for people to start jumping in, I'm gonna go ahead and start kind of deep diving really into a recent blog post we had that I think is pretty beneficial for a lot of sellers because a lot of people um, struggle with the same things, right? Like I've spent a third of my life in this space, in the Amazon space in any way, shape, and form you could almost imagine. And having gone through those same phases myself, dealing with the same struggles myself, and then kind of switching over to the software side and seeing, tens of thousands of sellers, you start to notice these patterns. And so, in our weekly blogs, our content, the education that we're doing, I'm trying to highlight a lot of this. What I really want to do is start to expose these things, bring them to light, and also like kind of give you the language for understanding what you may be struggling with. And then like, here's how to deal with it. And also like it's not just you. So like, don't personalize it. A lot of sellers struggle with the same kind of things. But one of the things, and I'll share my screen here, I think is a big deal is the shiny object syndrome. God, that's a mouthful, isn't it? The thing that is so important about this is that there's this interesting pattern where a lot of sellers, especially when getting started, go from course to course to course. And they're doing that. And because when you start to dive into their language and ask, okay, well, why are you doing this? Well, I'm missing the last piece of the puzzle. I'm missing something. I need that last thing. Well, you will never find that last thing through education and things like that, because the last piece of the puzzle, that last, 10, 20%, what have you, is hands-on experience. It's actually doing the work. And so what a lot of sellers do is they find themselves struggling in this shiny object syndrome issue. And what that means is basically they struggle with one business model. Let's say they pick RA, right? They pick retail arbitrage. They go, okay, cool. I'm gonna commit to this, and I'm gonna build this awesome business, blah blah blah. And then what happens is they start to hit their first struggle points, and they're like, all right, well, I'm missing that last piece of the puzzle. I'm gonna keep trying to find it. They struggle. They don't find the last piece of the puzzle. They chalk it up to it's the model. RA doesn't work. RA is dead is kind of how they feel. They go, okay, well, what's the next best thing? Let's go to online arbitrage. And then they rinse and repeat that same cycle. And so what happens is you never actually gain any experience. You never actually commit a lengthy period of time to figuring things out. And instead, what happens is you stay in this perpetual cycle of being a beginner. And so what happens is you go nowhere fast, right? You're working a ton, you're hustling, you're busy, what have you, but nothing's really getting done. Now, there are a few things you can do to fix this. And as people are jumping in here, by the way, go ahead and add any comments, any questions you have into the chat. Happy to dive deep into Aura features, all that good stuff. So there's a few things that I found that work really well in solving this problem. One is just acknowledging that could be the case. I'm a big fan of committing a period of time to one thing. So you're like, hey, this is a 1-year commitment. At minimum, I'm giving this solely a year. Awesome. Sometimes it's a decade, right? Like with Aura, it was a decade-long bet. I'm like, I'm gonna commit 10 years to this. All right, perfect. That way, as you go through the eventual ebbs and flows, you're like, all right, that's fine. But like, I'm 2 years into 10 here. Like, we got some time to figure things out. Now, the thing that I think a lot of sellers don't particularly spend enough time on is choosing the right model. And by right, I don't mean like objectively better. It's subjective. It's specific to you. So, and I kind of talk about this here in his blurb, but if you're really good at networking, cold calling, sales, things like that, the underlying skills for succeeding in wholesale, you should probably focus on wholesale first and foremost, because you're going to do well by default, or at least better than the person who struggles with those things and doesn't have that skill set already. Whereas if you don't have that skill set, yeah, you should probably avoid wholesale for a period of time, at least getting things up and running to buy yourself time to build that skill set, if you even want to, right? A lot of people want to jump from wholesale to private label and private label to wholesale. Well, why? Both can succeed. Both can be 7, 8 figure businesses. But the issue is the person who's running that business, right? Like that's the differentiator here. And so if you really want to build something that you want to invest in, hold for a period of time, then exit for a nice multiple, private label is probably a great idea for you, especially if you like the idea of building a brand and all these things. Awesome. You should probably do that. If those things don't sound exciting to you and you're like, I kind of need to quit my job today. Okay, well, that's a different story. Private label makes no sense for you. That's a down the line kind of situation. So this whole concept of reverse engineering, and we have a whole post on this as well. Like how do you get clarity, right? How do you understand what you're working on? How do you know that you're spending your time on the most impactful things? Because a lot of sellers will have 2 to 4 hours a day to work on the business. Well, that's not a lot of time. It's enough if you're working on the right things. And so it's very important that you get clarity on where you're going. You're being intentional about the decisions you're making, and then you're committing to that. If you can do that, you're well ahead of most sellers. And then another thing here is like joining the right community. Whenever you can shift your identity, that's a good thing. So when I shifted my identity from I'm an Amazon seller to I'm a SaaS founder, I'm a tech founder, immediately the content I'm consuming, the people I'm spending time with does change, and it needs to. And what's important to highlight here is in the model you're focusing in on. So if that is specifically wholesale, great. Spend most of your time with people already succeeding with wholesale or starting to succeed with wholesale. Doesn't have to be massive gurus, anything like that. Just peers, right? People who are fully focused and committed to that one thing. Because what you don't want to have happen is somebody be like, well, I do OA and like I'm more successful than you, so why don't you just switch? Well, that's not a good enough reason, right? Like just because that person's successful with something doesn't mean that you necessarily will be. Doesn't mean you can't either, right? But again, this level of like strategic thoughtfulness really starts to add up. So we really like highlighting these things. We also have a whole blog post we wrote on like how to actually network as a seller, because you hear a lot of this, online, especially like Twitter and stuff like that. But if you're the average of the 5 people you spend your time with, choosing those people is very critical. If you want to have a successful wholesale based Amazon business, you should probably hand select the 5 people that are doing well in wholesale, or at least starting to. And again, nothing is right or wrong. It's just purely contextual to you, and it should be personalized to you. I think that's where a lot of people get things mixed up. They go, well, people are just saying this, so I'm going to go do it. But why is that good enough for you? Maybe you need something different. And that's important. That takes some self-reflection. That's, sit down with a piece of paper and a pen and kind of journaling things out. But it's important. I had to go through something similar myself when we launched the software business. I had the Amazon business, and I had to make a tough decision, which was I'm going to shut down the Amazon business. It's profitable. Wasn't so big that I could hire a bunch of people and just like carry on. But I made the strategic decision to say, well, that's the thing I want. I reverse engineered what I wanted, had the opportunities laid out in front of me. I said, well, I'm going to get rid of all these things that are going to steal my focus so that I can reclaim a lot of that and really get this up and running and moving fast. Great decision in hindsight, but hard to do in reality, in real time. So hopefully, this is a great blog post, goaura.com/blog. Yeah, really good stuff here. So we're diving into different topics every single week. Still deciding what I'm going to write on this week. So if you have any ideas of things, any burning questions or things you're struggling with, throw those into the comment section. It makes it super easy for me to be like, all right, cool. A lot of people are struggling with this. I may already have an answer, or I can go find an answer. I love writing on that kind of stuff. So definitely throw that into the comments. So we're going to kind of transition back over to me here. Now, one thing I really think sellers need to start thinking about is how the world is going to be changing in the near future, especially for and as a seller, because a lot of it is changing right before our eyes. I just saw a demo yesterday of an AI agent that is a software engineer. It's not perfect, but it can plan tasks. You basically, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. It can break that down into its own subtasks, go learn, figure out how to do things. If it makes an error, it can fix it for you or for itself. You can imagine that the fact that people are trying to solve reasoning right now. It's like, well, cool, Dylan, like, why does that matter? Because if you can understand reasoning, if you can solve for reasoning in code, you can now reason through a lot of problems. one of those problems is sourcing inventory, is making certain decisions. It is understanding here's all this raw information, like your sales data, your product data, all these things. And how do we make sense of these things, right? How do we reason from this data to get to a point where we can make incredibly profitable decisions? We're seeing this a lot in different use cases, and kind of makes sense. A lot of times you're going to pick one very specific use case, you're going to go solve for that, and then kind of transfer what you've learned into other areas. Software engineering is one that's getting a ton of focus right now because writing code is very logical in a lot of cases. So I think what will happen, and I've said this a lot, but I think what will end up happening is those things will start to come over to e-commerce as a whole industry very quickly. And then it will trickle down into those sub niches, right? Amazon, Walmart, reselling as a whole. But you're already starting to see Amazon make some moves on the generative AI front. They're building, if they haven't released it already, at least I haven't gotten access to it, a basically like an AI that helps you search and find what you want using natural language, right? So like search is going to change, right? You see this with companies like Perplexity, where I rarely go to Google anymore. I don't go to google.com and search and try to go through all the links and figure out what I need. I just ask Perplexity. It does all that for me and comes back and says, here's the answer. And here's a reference to the source. Well, that's pretty cool. But how does that change things in the Amazon space, right? If we're relying, especially as a private label brand, if we're relying heavily on search and search changes, the game itself could change. I don't know how quite yet, right? This is very early. This is a big thought experiment kind of thing. A lot of things are changing in real time under our feet. But that's just one aspect on Amazon itself, right? Now imagine what happens when you get access to tools, these AI agents, where you are able to autonomously source product. That's kind of an interesting thing, right? Because think about your virtual assistants. Everything your VAs do will go away. It will go to code, because all a VA is really doing is moving information around on a computer or the internet. Turns out AIs are really good at doing that as well. So it's getting access to this technology, and it's that technology being trained and specifically fine-tuned for that particular task, which again, at what point do we get to, sourcing agents? It's hard to say. I would venture to guess in a few years, if not less, but definitely something to keep an eye on, right? So I like to, and I'm optimistic, by the way, I say this all positively, but it's like, as a business owner, you should really be forward looking and forward leaning and kind of ask yourself these tough questions, which is like, how does things change in the next 6 to 8 months? What tools should I be experimenting with that may be early, but at least I can understand them early enough to the point where when they are usable, when they are applicable, I'm at the forefront there. Now it's a competitive advantage. When you think about competitive advantages, you've got labor, you've got capital, you've got technology, you've got, your network. A lot of these things are becoming readily available, to the point where like capital is not really going to be a competitive advantage. Your network, I think, will always be, but why do you need a network? Well, it's typically for access to very specific knowledge. That also could go away, right? When you have an AI that's trained on the entirety of the internet, like some things are going to transfer and some things are not. But I'm rambling. I like to get people thinking about these things because I think it's super, super important. One cool announcement, though, we will be, or at least I will be in at the Miami Seller Conference this weekend. So if you're going to be there, please hit me up on Twitter. Would love to hang out. Would love to, take pics, all that good stuff, and just kind of geek out on all the things, repricing, Amazon, AI. But yeah, so I'll be driving down this Friday, staying for the whole weekend, and then just geeking out. It's gonna be awesome. There's a lot of amazing people like Chris Grant going, Miles Garrett, David Kim, who's going, who I'm trying to sync up with Friday, actually. So a lot of awesome people. So if you're going, let me know in the comment section for sure, because we'd love to hang out. So as we're waiting here, we got a lot of people jumping in, which is awesome. So hello, everyone jumping in. Go ahead and throw in any comments, any questions you have. Happy to dive deeper into any specifics for for or the product features. How do you do certain things? Even if you're like, hey, I have no idea how to create a strategy. Cool. Let's deep dive on that today. We could also go more meta on it and talk more broadly about problems as a seller, right? Funding. How do you deal with capital allocation? How do you hire? Things like that. There's a ton of things to cover. But this is just an awesome open format session where we could just sit down and say, great, whatever crops up, that's where we're going to go and focus our time on. So as we're waiting for these things to come through, I think one thing I would like to dive deeper into actually is workflows, because a lot of sellers don't. Let me pull this up here. We're going to do a screen share for you. A lot of newer sellers are coming into Aura, which is awesome, especially with the new early stage program. So if you're not aware, early stage recently went live. I'll put a link for everyone here. There we go. So there's the early stage program. The early stage program is designed for newer sellers. We found that there's a big gap between getting access to advanced or modern repricing, as we like to call it, and basically being able to afford that, right? And so like there's always been this monetary gap where it's like, well, you have to pay X amount to get access to these things. And we think that's kind of wrong. We've thought a lot about this. And for us, it's like, how do we make advanced repricing accessible, especially for newer sellers? Just because you're new and don't have a ton of inventory doesn't mean you can't benefit from it. And so our whole philosophy here is, what if we could create a plan or a program to where you still got access to these things so we can help you grow faster? And so what we did is we designed a program it lasts 12 months, and you basically pay $27 a month. This is only for new sellers coming in. So you can't be a current Aura user, have to be doing less than 10 grand a month in revenue. If you fit that, go ahead and apply, because you literally get access. You get access to Maven, you get access to Hyperdrive. Like, you have limited access on each of these features, but there's no feature gating in the sense like you just don't get that period. Like, you can now pay $27 a month and get access to Maven for up to 12 months, right? So if it takes you 12 months to get over that 10K a month hurdle, great, no pressure. Don't worry about it. Take your time, right? There's a lot of times a lot of pressure to grow at a certain pace. And sometimes, yeah, if that's what you're intentionally deciding for yourself, do it. But I don't want you to feel like you have to figure out things overnight, right? You got a lot of things to figure out. You got the whole business operations side. Maybe you're hiring and working with VAs. You got to learn how to source, manage all these things. And for us, it's like, well, how do we just give you leverage? How do we make it easier for you to grow, take some things off your plate, and not cost you an arm and a leg? So just want to highlight that. I think it's a fantastic product. We've been beta testing this for the past handful of months, and the results and the feedback so far has been phenomenal. So definitely apply if you haven't already. We go through applications every single day. But yeah, give that a shot. So let's go ahead and switch gears here. Stephanie Green, love it. Early stager here. Love hearing that. So Stephanie, I want to focus in on you. What is your biggest question or struggle so far with repricing or as a seller? Because I don't know, you could come in and be like, Aura's a breeze, I got this done. No questions here. We can go more meta on it, but I'd love to get some questions for you, especially as a newer seller coming in that early stage program. You're the type of person we definitely want to spend a lot of time with and help get some clarity wherever it makes sense. And if there's any other early stagers in here, please comment. Would love to hear, hey, I'm in early stage as well. Let us know. See Stephanie. Oh, love this. I'm brand new, so still learning the basics. Just met with Finn today. Awesome. So you got your onboarding session today, which is fantastic. Hopefully he was like, hey, you should go check out office hours. Yeah. So, one thing that I really like to highlight is that personal onboarding session. A lot of, again, we've been sellers, so I've used tools where you're just kind of thrown into a sandbox and it's like, hey, go figure it out or go read the documentation. Sometimes that's easy. Other times you're just like, I need somebody to talk to. Got you. We've designed our support system so that you can jump in and never talk to us and crush it. Awesome. But if you're like, I could use a little bit more like hands-on approach here, or I just have like some deeper questions, awesome. We can go as deep as we need to. So yeah, the onboarding session is fantastic. Finn's amazing. Finn's been onboarding a ton I know when we first launched in December 2018, wow, it feels forever ago. I personally onboarded the first 300 users. Learned a ton, learned a lot during that process. So I like that we're continuing on that philosophy of just like however much you need us, we're here for that. So happy to have you on board, Stephanie. Hopefully you're enjoying the performance so far and the product so far. So I want to switch gears. And again, keep these questions coming in. I'm going to go ahead and jump into workflows a bit, because I think workflows are important, especially for newer sellers getting started. It's a way to take a little bit more work off your shoulders. So workflows, if you're familiar with like Zapier or Make.com, this is kind of where this idea came from, right? We're like, well, okay, let's look at all the actions that sellers still have to do. This is prior to workflows. And we're like, well, you still have to assign a strategy, enable repricing, all these things. And so our whole thing is, well, how do we reduce the amount of work it takes you in the application, right? Because I don't want you to have to manage your listings. I want you spending a lot of time in here looking at things like the analytics for your products, right? Really understanding what levers do I pull? Let me make some important decisions, but the simple stuff, that should be abstracted away. Oh, I love this, Caesar. Hey, Dylan, new here. Just switched from another repricer. Loving it so far. Happy to have you on board, Caesar. That's awesome. always love that. That's fantastic. So workflows allows you to basically take these Lego pieces, as I like to call them, and basically structure them in any way that makes sense for you. So we have events. These are like triggers, and then you have actions. And so the first one I think everybody should do, and I'll give you some caveats on this, is we want a new listing event. And what we want to do is we want to assign a strategy and enable repricing. So we'll make it super simple this round. We're just going to say we're going to do Maven, and I'm going to give you the caveat on Maven for in a moment. And then we're going to enable repricing. So if we were to enable this, every time a new SKU got imported, or we listed it got imported into Aura, we're going to set the strategy. We're going to enable repricing. Awesome. You should be doing this. The only difference here is that it's not necessarily a best practice to automatically set an AI strategy using your workflow. Now, should you default to using an AI strategy? Yes. The difference here, though, is there is that cap on how many listings you can apply Maven to, right? So if you're on Pro and you have 10,000 listings that are available and you tend to carry 2,000 on average, you could do this, not a problem. If you're, kind of butting up against that, that's where it's going to cause some problems. In which case, I would say probably default against that, but something to think about. Try to make it super simple, but this is one area that really lets you, again, take something that would be manual and just remove that manual work very, very well. And we can make this even more complex if we need to. Let's say we wanted to say only certain ones get Maven. Okay, well, we could do that. We could say if the SKU contains, let's just call it Walmart as an example here. So if it contains Walmart, what I want to do is I want to set my strategy to Maven. And if it doesn't contain that, I'm going to set it to my main strategy. And then I would want everything toggled on for repricing, right? So I can whittle this down, right? I like to think about this in terms of buckets. You start with the largest section of the bucket, and then you get more granular as you go through. So we have these filter blocks. It's super important that you understand that you have to nest these in. So if I was to unnest this, filter block wouldn't do anything for me. We have a lot of documentation on this at help.goaura.com, by the way, but this is the go-to workflow that I think most people should have. Makes it super simple. Again, we're just trying to free up more time. And you see, we actually have something like that active on this demo account here. It frees up more time to go do the things that you are uniquely suited to do, which is sourcing, hiring, all the more high impact things, right? Now, we can make this super simple, and you could just jump in, bulk add Maven to all your things, and assuming you don't go over your cap, not a problem, super easy. But I would love to dive deeper into any questions you have on workflows, any additional types of workflows. We tend to see two go-tos for the most part. Really, like that first one is the new listings, setting the strategy, enabling repricing. Second one's really, I've seen variations of this, but basically at some point during the day, changing my price. However, with Maven, kind of need that a lot less. That's called the yo-yo strategy. Essentially, you have your repricing strategy doing the basic stuff. And then every 3 hours or once an hour, you go to your max price or 20% above the buy box price and you hold it there for 20 minutes. Fantastic. However, Maven kind of removes the need to even have that. And I'm a big fan of reducing complexity, right? So if we can have something be super simple, especially for you as a user, that's what I would tend to recommend. Let's see here. See, Willie has a good question here. Anyway, you guys can somehow get Aura to reprice / match an item with FBA offer, not FM merchant fulfilled. For example, lowest FBM offer is $20 and lowest FBA is $24, but Aura will price match 20. Yes. So let's actually do that now. So we're going to do a custom strategy because this is a very specific thing you want. So I would do custom. What I'm going to do is there's a few variations of ways we can do this. But again, I'm going to take the simple approach here. We're going to target the buy box itself. And then I have a few options. I can either treat them differently or exclude them. I recommend treating them differently. So what I can do is I can say, if these two are not enabled, the how to price against the competition will apply to everyone. I want to change that, right? So if the moment I say, I want to price differently against Prime, this is now, you see how that changed, how to price against non-Prime sellers. So I can say, for, let's say for non-Prime, I want to price above them by, let's call it 2%. And then I want to match for Prime sellers. That's exactly how we would do that. Let me just read this here. None with FBM, not FBM. Now, if you wanted to exclude, there's a few ways we could do that. We could actually target the lowest FBA offer and just rule out merchant fulfilled entirely. Or depending on their handling time, and this used to work a little bit better. Handling times have really compressed a lot. You could absolutely basically exclude based on the handling time. So if that person's handling time, that FBM handling time is, let's say, greater than 4 days, you could set that here and basically exclude them entirely. It just depends. That, I tend to say, again, go with the thing that's the most flexible. And I would say probably the best thing to do would be target the buy box and then reprice differently if it is merchant fulfilled. Because again, you're targeting the buy box. So if it doesn't matter if they're merchant fulfilled or not, they're in the buy box and you're not, right? So we do kind of want to think from that lens. But that's kind of how I would approach this. But this is a great question, Willie. Thank you for that question. See, John, do you think it's better to set my minimums at break even from the get-go with Maven? I usually set 20% ROI, but considering maybe setting all my listings to 0. This is a really good question, actually. So we have done this in accounts and have seen good results. What will happen is things where the market has shifted downwards, your price will go downwards, right? Like not in like we're tanking the price, but like if the buy box is at 5% ROI and that's where it's holding, that's where your price is going to go because you have that range. Now, with that said, Maven is designed to get you to what we call the optimal price, which tends to be higher. So we're still going to push it up as much as we can, but what's going to happen is basically you're going to track with the market really well. I think that's a good thing for the most part, because again, we're not pushing the price down. We're actually trying to grab the buy box and pull it up. So here's the way I tend to recommend this. I don't like the black and white, like, hey, just do this. I've done this for so many years that there are so many exceptions to the rule. What I recommend and what we have been doing with our users is saying, okay, if you're used to setting your minimum ROI at 20% using rule-based, that's probably not going to work as well with Maven because it's just a different paradigm. So instead, what I recommend is halving that, seeing how the performance is, and then considering changing or leaving it, right? So I would say don't go from 20% to 0% overnight. I would probably say go from 20 to 10%. See how that performs. If it's going well, you can consider lowering that again. But there's a few different schools of thoughts. Every seller is very different, John. For me personally, I like giving the AI the most range and just being like, it's 0% ROI, where the market is, where the market is. Maven should have the most amount of opportunity to do what it needs to do. And so for me personally, I would be okay with that with some minor exceptions. There are going to be listings that are exceptional in the sense that I would probably just manually apply a minimum price to that made more sense if it were just too much of a gap. But yeah, that's the way I would tend to recommend how to handle that. So half at first. And you can even go to 15%, right? Again, it depends how aggressive you want to be. And by aggression, I don't mean with your price. I just mean like, how comfortable are you with that change, right? If you're like, I'm thinking about it, but I'm not sure, I would probably say go from 20 to 15%. If you're like, no, I feel comfortable, great, go from 20 to 10%, see how that goes, and then consider either going lower with that or leaving it where it's at. But it's not necessarily going to hurt, is what I will say. We're not pushing your price down, right? I think this is where you hear a lot of like, I'm using this AI and like all it's doing is tanking and pushing my price down. You hear that with some of our competitors, and that's when I would say, no, you should not do that, because that's what they're designed to do. Maven is not designed for that outcome, to push your price down. So it will go where the market's at for sure, but it's always, again, trying to push that up higher, which I think is super important to highlight. See, Willie, can you do that with Maven instead, or is it a custom strategy? So going back to what we're talking about, like, handling merchant fulfilled versus prime sellers differently. Maven will handle them differently, but it depends on a lot more variables. So I can't exactly say like, if it's merchant fulfilled, it's going to do X, because there's way more variables at play. If you want it to be very strict, like do this, I would recommend you go with a custom strategy, because you're going to get exactly what you designed for. Now, Maven's far more complex, and depending on how hands-on you want to be, I would probably recommend defaulting to Maven first, seeing the performance there. And if you're not seeing exactly what you want, or you're not seeing the behaviors that you would want, that would work, that's when I would kind of fall back onto a custom strategy. So my philosophy here is I default to Maven and then fall back onto a custom strategy for those exceptional situations. There's always exceptional situations. There are situations where you just need a very specific outcome that Maven is not designed to do. Perfect. Go ahead and design that custom strategy, apply it, move on with your life. Try to make it as easy as possible. Let's see, Steven, anything we should keep in mind with international listings on Aura? I was wondering why Aura doesn't just convert currency automatically. Thanks. Yeah, so you will need to do that currency conversion. We do it in the sense that we're not doing currency conversion in the sense like you put in $20 and then we're going to say, great, like we're going to convert it to pesos, but you convert it over and say, hey, this is a, what's a currency rate for pesos right now? Let's just call it 100 pesos is 20 USD. You would want to convert that yourself and say, great, that's 100 pesos. Wherever you see that currency symbol, that's how Aura is thinking about it. So whatever value you put in there, it's assuming it's that currency. Now, what's important, and something I think you should keep in mind, is your strategies. You can actually change the currency. So I'll actually show you exactly how to do this here. It's important to think in the context of the currency itself, right? So again, we're in that same strategy builder. If I go up here, we see USD. It's going to default to your preferences from your settings. There's a default currency, which you can change, right? So if you buy everything in CAD, Canadian dollars, and you sell everything in CAD as well, probably change that to CAD. But I can basically specify this for my strategy, right? So I can say, this is going to be Mexican pesos. Great. So what's important here is now everything's it's not going to do 2 pennies, 2 USD pennies. It's going to do 2 Mexican peso pennies, which I'm not sure what the terminology is for peso pennies. I'm going to call them peso pennies. I apologize. But that's essentially what we're going to do, right? And so this is important. So if you are intentionally buying things and selling them in other markets, you should be doing that conversion yourself for the cost, because your cost really doesn't change that much. Or at least, I would expect it not to, but I would, if you're heavy in other markets, create strategies that think in that currency. So if I sell heavy in Mexico, I'm probably going to have a peso based strategy. The strategy itself can be the same, but as I'm thinking through making changes, I'm making 2 units of pesos of a difference, not 2 pennies, which then technically might be like 10 pesos, right? Or 10 penny pesos, if you will. Hopefully I'm explaining this correctly. But it's also important for things like your maintenance, or really your mins and maxes, right? This is going to think, if it's dynamic like this, ROI margin, it's going to think in terms of that percentage, which is pretty straightforward. But if we're doing it as like a fixed profit, there's a big difference between 5 pennies and 5 peso pennies, right? So super important there. So I would say when you ask, what should I be aware of? How should I be thinking about this? This is how I tend to recommend dealing with currency itself. Now, what we are doing on the currency conversion side, because we do currency conversion, we just do it differently. So whenever you're on your marketplace or the dashboard, right? And let's say you have US and the Mexico marketplace. When you see things in USD, we are actually taking the peso sales and converting those over into, and we're doing this on the day so that it's actually like as accurate as we can get it. We will actually convert that over to USD. So when you're looking at USD, that is true converted USD as best as we can get it. What we're not doing is saying, hey, put this in as a $100 or a $20 USD cost and then convert that cost to pesos. We don't do that just because that fluctuates way too wildly, in which case that could cause a lot of price changes and variation that really doesn't add value. It can cause some problems. So we're trying to be very intentional about using currency conversion in a way that adds value, doesn't create problems. But hopefully that answers the question. That's a great question, by the way. Let's see here. See, Jeffrey, is there a way to push prices over to eBay? I noticed, or I don't need the AI features, just the updated pricing that it makes. Thank you. Not at the current moment. We are exploring other integrations. We actually have some really cool integrations, not sales channels necessarily, but some awesome integrations coming your way in the coming weeks that we're actively working on. We have 3 that we're working on right now. And then circling back over to Walmart, looking at eBay. No promises, in terms of timeline, but Walmart's becoming really, really popular. eBay, it feels like it's getting talked about a lot less for some reason. I know a lot of people are really using it as like a fallback for returns where they can just flip it as used there and not really have to deal with much in terms of fees. But I would say Walmart's probably the next larger focus because it's starting to grow. There's a lot of resources going into it. They're really investing from what we're seeing into sellers. So I think that's going to take hold really, really quick. Let's see, Stephen, how should I learn about currency strategies? So the thing about, strategies, the strategy itself can be the same. You can literally duplicate your main strategy, but changing the currency, the default currency for that strategy just helps make things clearer. Because again, you might say, let's say again, you're selling in pesos, but your strategy is in USD, and you say, I want to be 1 penny below the buy box. Well, that's 1 USD penny, not 1 peso penny, right? So you're going to assume I should be 0.01 below the price that I'm seeing, and actually you're 0.06 beneath the price that you're seeing. And you're like, well, that makes no sense. Well, it does because of the currency conversion. So the only thing that you really need to learn and understand is that part. Everything else, how the strategy performs, all that stuff is the exact same. It's just making sure that we're using the same currency language, if you will, whenever we're dealing with other currencies. It's very difficult to work and apply things in pesos that are thinking in USD and every other combination, right? Japanese yen, doesn't matter. I would just say localize as much as you can to the currency you're selling in to just make it clearer for you. It's easier to manage and is less complex and frictionful, if you will. I'm gonna use the term frictionful because it causes a lot of problems, but very easy things that you can do. Let's see, does Maven try to capture the buy box nationally, or does it capture buy box in a specific geographical region? I noticed 3 different buy box winners in different zip codes. Yeah, I love this. Regional buy boxes. So not something that is possible now. So anytime we use the term buy box, we're talking a singular national buy box. How do you know which one we're talking about? If you use incognito mode and you load up that listing, that's the one we're talking about. Anything that is regional or local is not quite yet shared via the API. There's really no concept of that. And a lot of sellers are like, man, I wish we could reprice regionally. I do too. If you think about it though, I don't think this is going to happen because especially from an API model perspective, there's only one concept of the buy box and only one price. The moment you go to regional buy boxes and regional prices, everything changes. Everything fundamentally changes. And we only have the concept of one price, right? One active price. So if we went from one price to now you could have more than one, could be 5, 7, it depends. That's when the whole world changes, to be honest. Like, it's such a massive change that I think Amazon's going to be very slow to push into that. If they ever do, they probably won't, because it's a massive deal. So it's probably not going to happen anytime soon, but I wish that were the case. Now, my recommendation for how do you increase sales given regional buy boxes: ship in more inventory that is more distributed. We've tested this before, especially with our wholesale based sellers, where we're like, cool, like we're as optimal as we can. It's like, cool, we want more. Great. Ship in 25% more units than you're used to, so we have more geographical spread and more exposure to these regional buy boxes. Doing that did increase sales very well, very well. You just have to make sure that your inventory is being distributed in a way that makes sense, as much as you can control. Obviously, just making sure that they're not all going to one place and sitting there. But if you're doing that, you're probably in a really good position. See David White here. Hey, Dylan, I'm looking at some data that is showing only 11% of sellers on Amazon have monthly sales of 5,000 to 10,000, and only 7% at 10 to 25,000, with 31% under 500. Do you know if this is correct? If so, what's your take on this data? I don't know if that's correct. That's a hard thing, to validate. What I will say is there's still a large number. Yeah, I care less about percentages. I think percentages are interesting and cool depending on what your goal of looking at this data is. For me, I care about the total number, right? Why? Because, well, that's the people we support. We want to know how big's our market, right? So, we'll look at how many people are doing more than $100,000 a year in revenue. Turns out it's actually a pretty big number that totally exists. As a percentage, yeah, it's different. It's a power law, right? So this is always the case. You have to keep in mind, and here's my thoughts on this data here specifically. Amazon is an easy business to get started with. Doesn't require much. There's no real friction, right? You just sign up, pay $40, $60, whatever it is now, and technically you have a business, right? However, it's not as easy to succeed, because a lot of people come in with this preconceived notion that it's this side hustle that's easy. All you have to do is X, Y, and Z, and blah, blah, blah. People get sold the dream. Then reality hits. Hey, you're actually building a real business here. And that's a whole skill set. There's a lot to learn. And so what happens is you have a huge influx of people getting started and a very small amount of people who stick with it and learn enough to really scale far, or, as far as they want, right? No, not everybody has to have a 7 or 8 figure, 9 figure business. You don't have to want that, by the way. You could be like, I do, 300K a year and I'm happy and I'm good. Great. Don't grow it. But this is always the case, right? The percentage of people that do $1 million a month in revenue, really small, still a decent amount of them. So where I go as a previous seller with this data is, well, then what is the difference between that 7% that's doing 10 to 25 grand a month and the 1% that's doing 6 figures a month? What is actually the difference between those two people? Because I want to close that gap, assuming I want that size of a business. Now, what's important, and I think I'm going to take a mindset approach to this, is it proves that it's possible. If there's only one person doing that, I'd be like, yeah, there's not much data here. But we're talking percentages. That means there's more than one person based on the sheer numbers we're talking about here, right? Because that is the case. It means that it's possible. Multiple people have done it. You just now need to go figure out how to do it. Right. So I talk about this a lot in like the shiny object syndrome blog post that I mentioned earlier in the call. Goor.com/blog. It's the most recent blog post we released this past Monday, and talking about like your community. Like, if you're the average of the 5 people you spend your time with, where do you want to go? Where do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Go hand select those people and go hang out with those people. Right. And so in terms of, any other perspective on this, it's hard to say, but without like really diving into it, it's hard to say like if this data is valid or not. Yeah. If you could, David, if you could actually share the source URL, I think that would be super helpful. And I'm happy to share this with everybody on the call as well. But I think that'd be super helpful for us to dig deeper. It could be like Marketplace Pulse is what I would imagine, but I like seeing these kind of numbers because it's cool. I really like to see these numbers change over time. I would like to see the trends, not just like the point in time slice, because I want to understand what's changing, right? Are more people like that 7%, right? Was it 3% a year ago and now it's 7%? Well, that means that it's becoming easier to grow. Or was it 20%? Now it's 7%, in which case it's becoming harder, right? You have to put all this data into context. And I'm a big fan of taking data and saying, what's the narrative here? What's the story? What's it telling me? And not the easiest thing for me. I'm still growing in that world, but I think it is important to look at these things, but I think it's very easy also to look at these numbers and either use it as validation, like I just gave with you, like this is a positive thing, or you could be like, well, because only 7%, then I can't do it. Based on what? Right now, you can use that data to hold yourself back. And I think it's super important to take whatever content, whatever data you're looking at and say, how does this either enable me or hold me back? And in some cases, you're like, listen, that is mathematically impossible for me to succeed with. Maybe it's not worth it. Okay, fine. Totally fine. Right. I think this is why a lot of people are starting to talk about, especially the Amazon space, like your why behind what you're doing. If you're like, well, I'm here to make money. Well, yeah, obviously every business is here to make money. Why this business? Right? Why this thing over anything else? And if you understand that thing, and the reason why I'm saying this is the odds could be ever stacked in not your favor. And you can say, yeah, but I care deeply about this thing and I'm going to pull this off. Okay. Then I don't care what the data says. Go pull it off. Do whatever you got to do to go pull that thing off. It's like, I forget the exact data, but it's like 90 something percent of startups don't hit a million in revenue, don't succeed. They basically they fail. They shut down. Well, that's kind of horrible to hear when you start a startup like we did, but we succeeded because we're like, well, we just have to figure out how to not die, right? We had this whole, there's a lot of, pithy things, but one of those is like, just don't die. If the business can just exist another day and another day and another day, you have another at bat and you can learn the thing that you didn't know and you can fix the thing that broke. And so I think keeping these things in context is very important of like, why are you looking at this data? What is this data telling you? And then how does that serve you? Sometimes you're like, yeah, we should not be doing this. Okay, cool. I think, given what I see in aggregate with sellers, I'm not really worried about it, to be honest. I'm seeing 20-something-year-olds that are putting up ridiculous numbers that are real numbers, not just like guru numbers, like actual numbers. It's pretty impressive. So, okay. So it came from Jungle Scout. Yeah, I can't speak to their data. I will say they tend to have really good data from what I've seen and very thoughtful. So I would trust the data more than most companies, to be honest, because they're very data driven. So I would say probably a pretty good thing to consider there. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. So Jungle Scout, they actually do a lot of good data. Jungle Scout, Marketplace Pulse. If you're ever trying to get an idea as to how's the market changing, what's happening here, I like seeing what percentage of sales are coming from third-party sellers on Amazon specifically over time, because if that ratio continues to grow, then that means sellers have more negotiating power in theory. And that means that they're going to invest into those people. Inverse could also be true. They could view that as a threat and be like, well, actually, I'm going to go ahead and, we're going to pull back because we want more control, right? So it all depends, but it's kind of good to see, okay, well, what's the data showing me here? And then what are Amazon's actions speaking to? That kind of gives you an idea as to how are they thinking about things and how decisions could be made from their perspective. That's a good insight. Yeah, something to think about. See, Francois, I'm struggling to find any repricer that behaves the way I need. I get runaway price drops. I get runaway price increases. Both of the extremes do not reflect where the competition is. I have 4,000 ASINs, but they are all one-offs. Hence the challenge in finding a one-size-fits-all solution. I have tried a few other trials, and I have to say, support and data is triumphing everything else I have seen. Love hearing that. Didn't read this whole thing before I threw it up, so I was trying to figure out where this was going, but happy to see it's a positive thing here. Yeah, Francois, that is a very difficult thing. It is very difficult to find a tool that does exactly what you need. And the reason why I say that is everybody is kind of different. And so our challenge is, how do we build something that gets 90% of the way there? Because if we can do that, like that solves a lot of the volume, a lot of the issues, especially when you're dealing with things like 4,000 ASINs. But very happy to hear that our support team, Finn, Casey, and again, we don't outsource anything. I like to highlight this. Like we don't have a bunch of VAs everywhere. It's literally an in-house team. So you'll talk with Finn and Casey. But happy to hear that they're helping you out here and the data's been awesome for you. That's fantastic. Let's see here. Follow up here from Francois. I'm experimenting with taking my current price and setting max and min using a percent either side in bulk. This may help. Yeah, that's an interesting one. It really depends. Actually, I wrote a whole blog post. Actually, let me share this with everyone here because we're writing a lot these weeks. A whole guide actually on how to deal with and set min and max values. So I'm going to pull this up here so everybody can see it. So this is just the essential guide to min and max prices. So go to the blog, the third most recent one. And we talk about why is it important? How do you go about setting these? And actually talk about like how setting these manually tends to not work. Although again, there are exceptions in how setting these automatically tends to do better in aggregate and why that is the case. We talk about Maven in here as well, because Maven dynamically sets that max price, which moves in real time as much as it needs to. So definitely want to highlight there, gore.com/blog. Again, it's that third one in the queue there, if you will. But yeah, definitely important. But yeah, setting doing it as a percentage can be kind of tough, because one thing I talk about in this blog post is how one way to manually do this is you want a gap that is, and it depends on what strategy you're using, but if you're using like an oscillation strategy, like a rule-based strategy, you actually don't want that gap to be super wide. It actually holds back performance. You actually want it to be kind of tight, but as the buy box value, the price itself increases, so should the range, right? Like a $4, min and max range at $25 probably makes a lot of sense. But the moment we get to like $85, that range is actually possibly too constraining and too tight, in which case I would say you probably want to raise that out to probably closer to like $8 to $10. So there are some things where mins and maxes are tough. That's why we're trying to basically make those as abstracted away from you as possible. Like if you could just never deal with it, that'd be awesome. And that's kind of what we tend to recommend too. Again, there's always exceptions. I love this, Caesar. Featured offer was at 5% with another repricer, currently at 28% with Aura. I love this. Yeah, I love hearing these things. We spent a lot of time, our team, blood, sweat, and tears into building the brand new version. I mean, we literally rewrote every line of code, moved to a whole different language, re-architected all the nerdy stuff. And, when you first come out and you start beta testing something new, you're like, we think it's going to go well, but we just don't know until we get enough data here. And it started to go really well, so much that we felt confident going public with it, kind of coming out of stealth mode, and just seeing things like this is phenomenal. So I'm happy to hear you're seeing higher featured offer values here. That's incredible. That right there is why we do everything we do. So that's fantastic. So we have a handful of minutes here and we'll start wrapping up. Any other questions or any topics anybody would like to dive deeper into? Anything you want to share? Caesar's sharing some awesome stuff. If you have any positive things you'd like to share as well, happy to highlight those. But we'll start to wrap up here for time. But yeah, we have a handful of minutes here, so we'll keep going. And again, this is just a nice open session. We can talk about anything, any feedback you have for Aura. Hey, how could Aura be better? Any feature requests or ideas? We love hearing these things. And while I'm waiting for those to come through, because not everybody knows about this, you can use Aura on your phone. So I actually have it. You can see the little icon here. So if I pull that up, this is the same account I was showing you guys earlier. This is live data. So everything we can do on desktop, we can do on our phones. So actually, there's a little notification. Hey, live office hours is happening. We even have support. So if you're like out and about at your kid's football game, like myself, you can be like, cool, let me jump in here and ask the guys some questions. So everything is accessible, right? We want Maven, Hyperdrive. We want features and technology to be accessible. We want the application to be accessible, just to make it as super simple as you can. Caesar, is there dark mode available? Not yet. Not yet. This is something we actually are. We have a lot of that sorted out. There's just a few more things we need to do. We're moving kind of fast on a lot of stuff behind the scenes coming your way. But yes, we do want dark mode to become available very soon. I will say that. And then one thing actually that I do want to highlight that recently changed. We haven't done a change log for this quite yet, but I do want to highlight this. Let me pull up specific page. A lot of people asking for this specifically, which makes a lot of sense, but let me. So I'm going to share my screen here. So being able to basically see more than 25 listings on a page. So I'm just going to pull up listings here. So now in the bottom left, you can choose how many you want to see for each one. So you do 25, 50, 100, small thing, but quality of life thing. That's pretty great. And it's persistent, which is nice, right? So this is actually saved as like a configuration for you. So if you set it to 50, it's going to stay at 50 until you change it, which is awesome. So little quality of life things. We have a few other things that are in the works that are on the quality of life side. And when we say quality of life, meaning like, it's not a whole brand new feature, but it does make things a lot easier. Things like seeing more than the last 30 days of data as well. That's going to be coming very soon. So yeah, it's all good stuff there. Awesome. So we're going to wrap up here for time. Let's see, John, actually, that one's a little bit more private. So I'm going to have you reach out to support in that bottom right blue icon. You're going to see that little blue circle. Go ahead and click there, reach out to support. We'll get you taken care of there. I just don't want to share that publicly. And oh yeah, Stephanie, great question here. I'm not seeing an app in the App Store. What's the best way to search for it? So it's not an app you download. To move fast, we did something called a PWA, Progressive Web App. All that means is when you're on your phone, you go to your browser, you log in, and on the dashboard page, and we have a help desk article actually on how to do that. And I will show you exactly that. Let's see here, do mobile, because it's different for Android than it is for iOS. So here's exactly how to do it. So if you go to help.goaura.com and just search mobile, you'll see Add Aura as a mobile app. Here's how to do it on iOS. So you essentially just use the share and then you add it to home screen, which is what I do because I have an iPhone. Name it, all that good stuff. And now it's going to perform exactly like a native mobile app, which is awesome, which means we don't have to manage multiple code bases, which is going to slow us down. We can actually just manage one and everything just automatically updates. It's awesome. And then Android's a little bit different, but same kind of thing. They just consider it installing the app from the browser, but it's roughly the same thing. But great question. I'm glad you asked that, actually. Let's see, Caesar, how often do you do these office hours? Yeah, I like ending with this, actually. So every Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST, we host these. Every now and then we may have to skip just for capacity, but it's typically Casey and myself. We like to start with just a specific topic to kind of get the brains going, if you will. And then we kind of have the conversation go wherever they need to, make any announcements we need to. But yeah, we're doing this every single week. Again, every Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST. It's an open session. So come with questions. Don't feel like you have to wait. If you got a burning question, reach out to support. We can sort things out way faster for you. But we love hosting these. We like being able to jump in and just deep dive on different things. Sometimes Casey doesn't hold me back and I deep dive on AI like I did today. Other times he's like, hey, we got to be a little bit more focused here. And we'll deep dive on things like workflows and different stuff like that. So yeah, every week, which is fantastic. So we'd love to have you back, of course. Let's see here. Last one, not really Aura related, but I have a few ASINs where my competition is selling fake Chinese item for the price I'm buying my genuine goods wholesale. That is difficult, Stephen. I would say probably report that to Amazon as best you can. There are some ways you could do that. You could actually buy the inventory and verify that it is indeed fake and actually report that. So there, you can either report it to the brand, depending on how that relationship is. If like we've worked with brands before with stuff like this, basically like there's markings that the brand can put on boxes that are very unique but subtle for every one of their buyers. And then we'll purchase directly from the buyer we're looking at and say, okay, cool, that's actually this person. They're being shady. Then we can go back to the brand and say, hey, the specific seller that's doing this is this. Obviously, like they're buying fake goods, so that route won't work, but something similar to that would probably do pretty well. So I would say however you can report that is the best thing possible. But yeah, so I appreciate everybody making the time to come here today. Again, this is fantastic. We love doing these things. We love doing education. We love just deep diving and geeking out on different things. So we'd love to have you back again next week. In the meantime, if you need help with anything, please do not hesitate to reach out to support. If you have feedback, if you have ideas, feedback.goor.com is where you can go to upvote things, comment on things, add your own ideas. We look at this every single week. We're looking at it tomorrow as a team, in fact. And then you have help.goor.com, which is all of our support documentation. We're starting to spin up more education videos and things like that. And again, if you're going to be at the Miami Seller Conference this weekend, I'm driving down this Friday. Would love to see you there. Please pull me aside and say hello. I'll definitely be having my Aura shirt on, so you'll know it's me. But with that, everybody have a great rest of your week.